you all so much for taking time from your busy, busy lives to join us today. I'm Brett Walter, the founder and CEO of Climate Action Now, producer of this series of action parties and creator of the Climate Action Now app. I see a lot of new names and faces today, which is fantastic. Please share your video if you're so inclined. This is a meeting. This is a party, after all, and tell us where you are in the chat and what organizations you're with, if that's applicable. For you new folks, let me give you a quick overview. An action party like this is not just your plain old webinar. This is an opportunity to learn about an important environmental topic like the Farm Bill from people who actually know what the heck they're talking about. And then, this is what makes a difference. In the same hour, use the Climate Action Now app to send hundreds or even thousands of personalized, well-researched, well-written messages to political and business leaders demanding action on the topic. And it works. Action parties have helped pass key legislation in many states. You'll find video testimonials from the likes of Bill McKibben and other leading climate activists on our YouTube channel, testifying to the effectiveness of these action parties. And I am just going to put some resources into the chat right now for you to take a look. The third resource is something brand new for you folks. This is not your first rodeo. Climate Action Now has created a new Substack called Your Daily Dose of Climate Hope. We just started this month. It's taking off like gangbusters. Bill McKibben has recommended it and others. And what it is a newsletter, short newsletter, comes into your inbox every Monday through Friday, has an action of the day for you to take, and you don't need the app to do it. You can do it on a website. And it has a message of hope, a positive new development in trends, technology, and people that are doing really cool, fun, hopeful things. So this is your daily dose of climate hope. If the bad news has you down these days, here's your antidote. But for tonight and our action taking, I'd like to hand the spotlight over to Matthew Vollrath, our Director of Content. Matthew?
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. To share my screen real quick and bring up the goal tracker, which is what we're going to use to actually take some action tonight. So there we go. Should be popping up on your screen momentarily here. If you are an old veteran of action parties, you've seen many of these, you know what this is all about. For anyone who is new, we've got two parts to this. We've got the QR code and then the goal tracker over on the left. So the first thing that we're going to have everybody do is take out your phones. Also works on a tablet, but most people like to use their phones, iPhone or Android, and open up your camera app. Anything or whatever you would do to normally take pictures, just open up your camera and point it right at the weird looking QR code box on the right-hand side here, and wait for a little yellow bubble to show up that says Climate Action Now. When it does, go ahead and tap on the yellow bubble. It will take you to the App Store to download the Climate Action Now app if you don't have it already. Or if you do, it'll take you right into the Farm Bill actions that we've prepared for you tonight. So I'll give everybody a moment to do that. If it's not working for you, worry not. We have many other alternative methods to get you onto the app. One of them is this little link that you see below there. If you type that into your web browser on your phone, not on your computer, but on your phone, it will do the same thing. It will take you right to the campaign if you have the app, or it will take you to the App Store to download it. So feel free to try that if the QR code isn't working. Or if neither of those options work, please let us know in the chat. We've done a lot of these. We have lots of strategies for making sure everybody's able to take action tonight, because that is what we're all here for. We're going to listen to our wonderful speakers. At the same time, we are going to actually do something about the problem that they are going to be telling us about. So I see that people are already on the app, already taking action. The way I know that is that the goal tracker on the left side is going up. We are already at 588 actions. Some folks already took action before the hour, and we're a lot more on the board as we speak, and our goal is to get to 700 actions. Hopefully we'll get there before the end of the hour, and we'll actually be able to set a new goal, up the ante, and get even higher. Maybe we can even get to 1,000 tonight. That would be really cool. But without further ado, then I'll just turn this over to Jessica Craven.
Wait,
And
Matthew,
oh, yep.
Matthew, sorry, back to me. Would
Oh.
you ask Cooper? Would you ask Cooper to increase the servers because things are getting slow for me?
Yep.
Yeah. So Matthew, thank you for that. And one other thing, if you are struggling with the technology, or you just want to focus on listening to the speakers tonight, that's totally cool. We'll be sending you a link to the recording tomorrow, and then you can, at your leisure, take the actions, and the recording will show again the QR code that you need in order to take the actions in the app. So not to worry, but it would be really great. Also, if you can, to be sending messages tonight during the action party. Finally, I'd like to extend my gratitude today to Dr. Marianne Krasny, the director of the Civic Ecology Lab at Cornell University, who moonlights as Climate Action Now's director of food policy. And Marianne took the lead in producing this action party with an assist from our new director of outreach, Liz Bridgewater. I also like to thank our co-sponsors, the Environmental Working Group, Evergreen Action, Chili's on Wheels, the Climate Reality Project, New York Chapters Coalition, Elders Climate Action, the Food Recovery Network, and NRDC, the National Resources Defense Council. This, folks, is how we win, with committed organizations like the ones I just mentioned, doing the hard work on the ground to get legislation introduced, and then with folks like you here tonight applying public pressure at key moments to get the legislation passed. And finally, special thanks tonight to our guest moderator, Jessica Craven, author of the hugely popular Chop Wood, Carry Water Substack. Jessica is an ardent climate champion and climate for other progressive causes as well. I'll put a link to Jessica's Substack in the chat. So with no further ado, over to you, Jessica.
Well, thank you, Brett, and hi, everybody. It's so nice to see so many of you here. It's just so nice to be in a Climate Action Now action party, because we know that we are going to learn something fantastic and take some productive actions and hear from great speakers. And we are all going to feel better afterwards. And I want to say one thing before I introduce the speakers today, which is that I love the Climate Action Now app. As someone who puts together curated actions in a newsletter 5 days a week, nobody does it better than Climate Action Now. In fact, they do it better than I do, and I am constantly envious of their actions and how well written everything is, the contact emails they find. I don't know how they do it, but I bow at their feet, and I really hope you will, get the app, use the app regularly, and make this a committed part of your day. And I also want to put in a plug for the new newsletter, which is so great because it'll give you just one action to take, so that if you miss the app, you don't get your 8 a.m. app reminder, you still take that one action and you get a dose of gratitude every day. I'm really excited about it, and I've been recommending it to everybody. So, all right, we have got 3 terrific speakers today. And here is our first speaker. His name is Jeff Horsfield. He is the policy director for the Environmental Working Group, and Jeff works on policies to make food more sustainable and healthier, including those touching on alternative proteins like plant-based meat. Prior to joining EWG, he worked in government affairs at the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals and interned in the office of Senator Cory Booker. That's, from New Jersey. Jeff holds a bachelor's degree from Gettysburg College and a master's degree in public policy from the College of William and Mary.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Right. Confirming folks can see it. We're on slideshow mode. All right, thank you.
Good.
All right, well, again, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you again for joining us tonight. I'm really excited to talk about this issue. And I think in particularly when we talk about progressive environmental movements, this is one that I think really exemplifies part of the issues when we talk about big agrochemical companies really trying to exert their influence over Congress to exempt themselves, to earn extra profits, really at the expense of farm workers, of rural communities, and of environmental justice communities. So in either the upcoming Farm Bill or the upcoming appropriations process, pesticide makers are trying to undermine state and local governments' rights to adopt rules that protect communities from exposure to toxic crop chemicals. This is pesticides like paraquat, which is connected to Parkinson's disease, or glyphosate, which is connected to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, as well as others. So pending House bills would achieve the company's goals, and they've been added to the Farm Bill in the House. These problematic pesticides, again, include Roundup, which contains glyphosate, and paraquat. We're asking Congress to stand strong against including any of these harmful riders should they come to the floor in either the appropriations process or in a Farm Bill vote. So first, we'll do a little Environmental Law 101, and we'll talk a little bit about how pesticides are regulated. So the key piece of legislation is called...
Jeff, I'm sorry, I want to interrupt. It turns out we may have a misconfigured action in the app. It's a letter to Joe Biden. So if that happens to you, just press the little X in the upper corner and skip, and then just continue taking the other action. So sorry to interrupt you, Jeff. I see that coming into the chat, and I experienced it myself. I didn't want to have people stop taking action because they hit that particular problem.
That's okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
The Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, or FIFRA, sets the federal floor on pesticide safety. That's the regulatory kind of structure that Congress intended, that the courts have agreed to, and that the EPA has also stressed. So that means that FIFRA sets a federal floor for the EPA. So state and local governments have the right and do so to pass an array of pesticide laws that supplement additional or current federal law, such as laws that can protect workers or laws that protect schools or children, right? Because they know their local communities best. They know that what works in one part of a state or one part of the country doesn't work for maybe their own town. So in general, states can pass laws regulating pesticide use so long as those laws don't conflict with federal law. And local governments, again, can regulate pesticides, and this has long been agreed to by the courts. Now, why would states and localities do this? So many states, cities, and counties, and I'm sure yours have adopted standards to restrict pesticide spraying near schools, citing the risks that they pose to children in particular. Some of these chemicals have been linked to serious health harms, including damage to the nervous system, cancer, Parkinson's disease, and harm to development and reproduction. Children are especially susceptible to potential health problems. More than 40 states have adopted tough standards for when and how pesticides can be sprayed near schools. EWG found over 4,000 public elementary schools are located within 200 feet of a crop field where pesticides could be applied. And pesticides are subject to what's called pesticide drift. So pesticides can drift for over 1/4 of a mile or up to a mile away from where they're originally applied based off of weather conditions. Now, these 4,000 elementary schools don't include the thousands of private schools, middle schools, parks, playgrounds, golf courses, daycares that children might be present in. At this link, I'll drop in the chat, you can find examples of laws and ordinances in your states, counties, or towns. A few examples: Texas and California, for example, have required school officials to use low-risk pesticides first. Alabama and North Carolina, you're not allowed to do aerial crop dusting near schools. Arizona, Maine, Michigan, New Hampshire, Oregon place buffer zones around spraying pesticides around schools. States of Illinois require that there be signs posted when pesticides are sprayed in public areas. And these laws are all designed to protect our kids from toxic pesticides. And of course, these laws don't always stop at, or these pesticides don't stop at the school fence. Other states like Iowa and Kansas have adopted laws that restrict pesticides from being sprayed in public parks. States like Oregon have required additional warnings on labels for pesticides, including information around antidotes, should a pesticide be accidentally consumed or should somebody accidentally come into contact with a pesticide. Here's that link in the chat. So feel free to explore, and you can see in your own towns what might be happening. So another reason that state and local governments have adopted their own pesticide standards or additional requirements on labels is to protect workers and farmers. For example, some states, again, like Oregon, restrict certain pesticides, citing cancer risks. Other states, like California, include additional warnings for, say, known carcinogens. Or in the future, other states might require that pesticide labels also be in Spanish or in other languages so that farm workers can understand and know what they're spraying. Now, it's important to note that because, again, of pesticide drift and where these pesticides are applied, rural communities are most at risk. For example, in California's Ventura County, and that's what's located here on this map, increased pesticide use and related toxicity risks for humans occur the most in areas with more people of color and limited resources, according to peer-reviewed studies. These studies found that living near pesticide spraying is linked to an increased risk of cancer, harm to the respiratory system, developing fetuses, as well as low birth weight and reduced IQ. This is another example of exposure to toxic chemicals and disparities in the healthcare system and in agriculture that continue harming Black and brown communities in this country. And many of these pesticides, again, which are linked to birth defects or cancer in people, also, of course, pose a risk to endangered species and wildlife, including key pollinators like bees, and states like Vermont have taken upon themselves to pass additional restrictions around threatened and endangered species. For more information on this study in Ventura County, you can visit this link here. There are additional information here that I want to include, but in particularly pesticide manufacturers, they want to limit states and localities from passing and enforcing these requirements for warnings and information related to pesticides because it allows them to bend the rules so that people sickened by exposure to these chemicals can't seek remedies. The courts have cited many of these state and local laws and warnings as part of liability in, I'm sure many folks have heard about some of the Bayer Monsanto glyphosate cases that are going around the country. Reporting just last month showed that Bayer's influence in Congress is being exerted to try to push these measures. If these pesticide provisions become law, these chemical makers could avoid having to pay millions in liability to cases for people sickened by exposure, even as emerging research shows more and more of these substances can cause more and more health harms. We can all think back to things like Agent Orange, how we didn't know for decades what the impact was of a pesticide like that. So by preventing states and localities from requiring additional pesticide warnings, these companies can minimize their liability for their victims' health problems, and they can protect their own bottom lines. I mentioned reporting last month. Here's that story in the Washington Post. So Congress originally intended, and again, the courts have agreed that states and localities have a significant pesticide oversight role when it comes to the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. The law establishes EPA's baseline authority, but gives state and local governments the power to enact additional measures. Those in support of undoing states' rights try to argue that allowing states and counties to require additional warnings for pesticides could create a patchwork of laws and ordinances. But of course, we know that's nothing new for any business. For example, we put in a retaining wall in my house last year because that wall is 38 inches. Because if it's 40 inches, I have to get a permit from Arlington County. That inch height requirement is different in Loudoun County or in Fairfax County. So we know that landscapers have to deal with a variety of local ordinances. What we're asking for is the status quo. We want to have different requirements for protecting state and local rights. What's more is that these parks, schools, and lawns don't often change counties or localities. And we all have little computers in our pockets too that can help tell us where we are. So what we're asking for is the status quo when it comes to pesticide regulations. Blocking state and local standards takes decision-making out of the hands of those most hurt by pesticide use, and states and localities are often in a much better position than the EPA to assess risks quickly, consider emerging evidence, and make decisions that protect their local environments and communities, including schools and childcare facilities. While EPA reviews pesticides for safety, they don't always take into special risks posed to children or workers, and EPA may not consider the risks that landscaping companies or farm workers are exposed to. What's more, EPA reviews the safety of pesticides only once every 15 years, so EPA standards often don't reflect the latest science. And of course, we have additional support from hundreds of mayors and local lawmakers, hundreds of environmental, public health, and agricultural organizations, as well as 20 U.S. senators and about 100 lawmakers as well in the House. So I'm happy to answer any questions at the end of today's action party, but that is all that I have. Now we all have a basic understanding of FIFRA, and we're ready for Environmental Law 201.
Great. And hey, everybody, congratulations. We hit our goal and we blew past it. You guys are smoking today and laying rubber. Fantastic. Keep up the great work. Back to you, Jessica. Oh, Matthew, let's set a stretch goal, okay?
Yeah. Let's do 1600. That on right now.
Woohoo! We can do this. All right, thanks, Jeff. And yeah, don't forget to put your questions for Jeff or anybody else in the chat. We're going to answer them all towards the end. But now we've got another amazing speaker. So our next speaker is Maisie Deans. Maisie is the government affairs advocate handling all congressional and administrative outreach for Evergreen Action. I love Evergreen Action. Previously, she worked on the Hill for almost 5 years for frontline members on the House Energy and Commerce and House Natural Resources committees. She's also worked on Democratic congressional and presidential campaigns. Maisie graduated from the College of Charleston in Charleston, South Carolina, where she studied psychology and political science. Maisie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jessica. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay, great. Thank you, and a huge thank you to Climate Action Now for putting this event on and for allowing me to share with you the importance of the climate smart guardrails in the Farm Bill this evening. And thank you also to my fellow panelists, Jeff and Eloisa, for covering pesticides and SNAP, two other issues of utmost importance in this Farm Bill. So as Jessica mentioned, I'm the government affairs advocate at Evergreen Action. And while I spend most of my time thinking about federal policy and working with our partners in the administration and on the Hill to enact legislative change, sustainable farming is actually one of the reasons that I got into this work. So it's a real treat to explore the connections between farming, justice, and the climate with you all this evening. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully y'all can see that. So part of why we're all here this evening is that the Farm Bill is our last big opportunity in the foreseeable future for federal climate legislation. And this is especially true when it comes to tackling climate change in the agriculture sector. As you may know, the greenhouse gas emissions from the U.S. agriculture sector currently make up around 10 to 11% of our country's climate pollution. And that comes from methane from livestock, nitrous oxide from fertilizer overuse, carbon dioxide from fossil fuel combustion, and other sources. And the fact is that the status quo agricultural practices are degrading our land, biodiversity, and climate while also harming the health and livelihoods of our farm workers. And all of these are important reasons for addressing climate change in our farm and food systems. And after this year's Farm Bill, the next Farm Bill will likely be debated in 2029 or 2030. And y'all know that's a loaded date because it's the due date for our national climate goals. So by then we need to slash our country's climate pollution in half at least. And we have to do that at every legislative and executive opportunity, including and especially the Farm Bill. Another reason why it's imperative that we address the climate crisis in the Farm Bill is because farmers are among the first to feel the impacts of our rapidly changing climate. For most of them, climate change isn't a future problem, it's a daily challenge. And we're hearing from farmers and ranchers all the way from Oregon to North Carolina, that they're increasingly dealing with severe droughts, wildfires, sweltering heat waves, and other issues that can altogether decimate entire fields and crops. And that's their livelihoods and our food supply at risk. So this touches everyone. And not only is it important for us to drastically reduce our emissions in the agriculture sector, but one of the really cool opportunities here is that the ways that we choose to farm can actually help us to reduce our carbon footprint as a whole. Certain climate smart practices like agroforestry, cover crops, no-till, crop rotations, and others have climate benefits, but they're only used on a small fraction of farmland. And so to meet the urgent challenge posed by climate change, it makes sense for us to invest in scaling them up. All this is to say that done right, the Farm Bill could equip farmers with the funding to help tackle a portion of the climate pollution from the agriculture sector. So how do we implement climate action in this Farm Bill? One of our best and most feasible strategies is by protecting the IRA climate smart guardrails. And the reason I say protect as opposed to advance an entirely new raft of climate policy is because these guardrails already exist thanks to the hard-fought and historic win that was secured on climate agriculture funding way back in 2022 when Congress passed our favorite Inflation Reduction Act. And as you likely know by now, as part of the IRA, Congress decided to provide $19.5 billion to the U.S. Department of Agriculture for farmers to keep participating in these wildly popular and oversubscribed conservation programs. But this funding came with a crucial catch, which was that the new funding for these conservation programs would be directed to practices that had the highest value for our climate. If you've been following the Farm Bill news coverage, this is what we call the climate smart guardrails. So let's back up for a second, because the USDA conservation programs have existed for decades, and they are a portfolio of incentive programs to help producers improve their environmental performance with respect to soil health, water quality, air quality, wildlife habitat, and more recently, greenhouse gas emissions. And they provide resources to farmers, ranchers, land trusts, forest landowners, et cetera, both through direct funding and technical assistance. And some of the programs are listed here in this slide. Now, despite what the GOP would have us believe, not all conservation programs are actually benefiting the environment and our changing climate. In fact, according to analysis by our good friends at EWG, thanks, Jeff, if Congress were to remove the legislative guardrails around this roughly $20 billion in funding, the USDA would inevitably revert to past practices where just 1/5 of its conservation funding actually went to farmers practicing methods that are reducing greenhouse gas emissions. This means these conservation funds are going to farmers for things like irrigation practices that maybe benefit their land, but likely don't benefit the climate, which we know in the long run is an unsustainable approach. So what's different about the funding from the IRA is that it's tied to climate parameters, which means that the additional funding must be used for climate smart agriculture practices that reduce, capture, avoid, or sequester harmful climate pollution like methane and nitrous oxide, which, as I previously mentioned, run rampant throughout the ag sector. In the simplest terms, what these programs really do is provide resources to support farmers in their transition away from the status quo and toward agricultural practices that will help sustain their farm and their livelihoods well into the future. They put money in farmers' pockets, and when designed right, they slash climate pollution while improving biodiversity and soil and water quality, which in turn can improve farms' resilience and longevity into the future. They also benefit the surrounding communities because they help farmers tackle environmental and water pollution that can spread through the local areas. And there are so many examples of how these practices can benefit farmers, but a really good one, I think, is cover crops. They can provide natural sources of nitrogen to cache crops and prevent soil nitrogen from being leached, thus reducing the amount of fertilizer needed for production and bolstering crops to be resilient to inclement weather conditions like droughts and floods. And in addition to the climate benefits that come from lowering inputs of fertilizer, it also translates to cost savings for farmers because fertilizer accounts for a significant amount of many farmers' cash costs. So these savings are huge. And it also reduces the nitrous oxide pollution and water contamination I previously mentioned in the surrounding communities. So we're really all winning here with these programs. And here's more great news about the climate smart conservation programs. They are popular with farmers and they're already being used. Application statistics show that USDA's climate smart agriculture programs consistently have more applicants than they have available spots. So revoking this needed funding for USDA's climate smart agriculture and conservation programs would be a mistake for farmers, their communities, and our environment as a whole, especially when these programs are consistently in high demand and benefit all farmers and ranchers. And it's important to note that these conservation programs are unique in that they are open to all applicants who are looking to implement climate smart practices, because this isn't true for all USDA programs. In fact, fewer than 20% of farmers can afford to participate in the USDA crop insurance programs. In contrast, the climate smart ag programs are open to all farmers, including and especially our small farms, which need the help. And where the rubber hits the road is that in May, the Republican-led House Ag Committee passed a farm bill that moves these billions of dollars provided by the IRA into the baseline of the conservation title of the Farm Bill and removes the climate smart guardrails, thus eradicating the bulk of the climate benefits and really going back on the whole initial intent of this funding in the first place. So as we look forward, our biggest climate push is to maintain unity among Democrats in the House and Senate to reject the Republican House Farm Bill text and protect these vital climate investments, which are protected in the Senate's proposed framework. And one of the best ways we can do this is activate farmers, ranchers, community members, and other stakeholders living in key states and urge them to tell their member of Congress to protect this climate funding. So thank you all so much for being here, and I will take questions at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. One thing before we move on to our next speaker, I just want to put the goal tracker up one more time on the screen for anybody who may have missed it. This is your portal into the actions that we're all taking tonight. Want to make sure everybody has a chance to scan this QR code, get up and running. Just leave this up here for a moment. And when I take it down, you can still scan the QR code from my little video panel, which will be spotlighted. Also, the URL to this this web page is in the chat if you want to bring it up on your own computer to scan it. We are already past our next stretch goal, which is awesome. I'm going to bump it up to 1,800. We're only halfway through the hour, so have a lot more road to go. I said it would be great if we got to 1,000. I think maybe we'll actually get to 2,000. That would be fantastic.
Okay, Jessica.
All right. Sorry, I was waiting for that. Okay, everybody, you're doing so great. Oh my God, I think we're gonna get there for sure. Keep up the great work. We have another amazing speaker now. Eloisa Trinidad is an award-winning policy advocate, liberation activist, educator, and artist. She is executive director at Chili's on Wheels and founder of Vegan Activist Alliance, where she works to make veganism and climate-friendly food accessible to communities in need and centers indigenous, traditional, and peasant knowledge to guide multi-species justice and planetary well-being. Her work has been featured on NBC, Civil Eats, Curbed, Salud America, Veg News, and Common Dreams. Very excited to hear you. Let's hear from Eloisa.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you to all my co-panelists and everyone who's here, keeping the hope alive. This is a horrific farm bill, and we are in a dire situation, and we need to take back our food system. It is completely monopolized, and as Jeff and Macy were saying, it is about time that our government really steps up to work for the people, not just for multinational corporations and all the factory farming that's impacting all of us, not just communities of color. Just a little background on Chili's on Wheels. So from the beginning, from when we started, we thought that it was extremely important to make sure that everyone had access to food that is climate friendly, that is healthy, that if we were going to see a change in the way that we approach the climate crisis, when we talked about behavioral change, that everyone needed to have that access so they could make those decisions that were better for them, for the planet, and for beyond human relatives. So really appreciate you all being here. And just bear with me as I try to share my screen and my slides. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
I can't. Okay, great. Thank you. I can't see anyone. So what is SNAP? A lot of you may be familiar with SNAP and food assistance. So bear with me as I go through this. So SNAP is the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It is the largest food assistance program in the United States, and it provides food benefits to low-income families to supplement their grocery budget, and it enables them to afford more nutritious food that is essential for their health and well-being. One of the great things about SNAP is that it frees up income for those folks to perhaps buy medication or to pay their rent, which is often something that is not talked about, especially for the elderly who may be on medication or folks who are disabled. SNAP is also known as food stamps, EBT, Link, or CalFresh, depending on where you are. And why is SNAP important? So the biggest thing is hunger and malnutrition. So I just want you to think about this as I go through these slides. In this country, we have about 44 million people who are food insecurity. 13 million out of those are children. So that's about 1 in 5 children and 1 in 6 people. So we have a really serious food insecurity problem. I believe that that is a political decision, and that if we made the right policies, not just within SNAP, but within access to education and other things, we would get rid of food insecurity in this country. There is no reason why food insecurity went up to about 50 million people in this country during that pandemic. It also supports local economies as well. And as I said earlier, provides that much needed support to families, families with children, people with disabilities, and the elderly. SNAP also offers emergency aid during crisis and provides long-term health and economic outcomes. So improving that long-term health impact also lowers healthcare costs. So who uses SNAPs? There's a lot of misconception around who uses SNAP, but one of the things that we find is even though communities of color are obviously more impacted due to historical injustice within our food systems and racist policies, hunger does not discriminate. Food insecurity does not discriminate. We also find that SNAP residents are both parents with children, so 2-parent households, and single parents households. So they're almost about the same, with just under 44% being 2-parent households and about 45% being single mother households. And the population receiving SNAP, it was about 42 million in 2023, fiscal year 2023. So almost 13% of the US population. And that's a high rate. And as we said before, what we find is that throughout following recessions, SNAP benefits are most used. And in 2022, we found that about 49 million people depended on food programs, not just SNAP, but going to their food banks as well. So here we have a map of food insecurity across the United States. So the green map is where SNAP is being used. And then on the left is where food insecurity is prevalent. And I will say this, every county in the United States, regardless of where you are located, has some level of food insecurity. That means there is a person everywhere in every place of this country that is suffering from food insecurity. That should not be the case. As we tend to see ourselves as leaders in the global economy and in human rights. This is a human rights issue. It's a climate issue. And there's absolutely no reason as to why this should be happening in the United States. So in 2022, about 41 million people were served per month with SNAP benefits. And obviously, we don't even need to go into the fact that where you see higher levels of food insecurity, there are higher levels usage of SNAP as well. Is SNAP effective? There are a lot of people who believe that SNAP really needs to be redesigned, that most of the people that are on SNAP are not buying healthy food. Now, I think that is a nuanced conversation. It is an issue of what is available and accessible in those communities and what food injustice is happening, whether that's food desert or food apartheid. Well, one thing that we do find across the board is that a lot of the SNAP participants do report better health than non-participants in SNAP. And so we want to listen to the people that are experiencing food insecurity, not the folks who are designing policy who do not have experience with food insecurity. One of the things that is often not discussed is the mental health issues associated with lack of food insecurity. So one of the things that we really tend to find is that students and children who don't have consistent access to food and healthy food have problems with concentration in schools, memory, motor skills, as well as depression, anxiety. And later on, when they become adults, they have a very disrupted relationship to food. And lack of access and consistent access to healthy food early in life can lead to not just depression and anxiety, but it's also associated with eating disorders such as binge eating disorder, anorexia, bulimia, and so on. So when we are investing in the health of communities by making sure that they have immediate access to food, we're not only addressing the physical need and the physical sustenance, but also the mental health impact and the potential of those people children who are in school are able to pay attention, are able to perform better in school as well. So how with the Farm Bill and how is it impacting SNAP right now? So the House Farm Bill will limit the USDA's capacity to determine SNAP benefits, undermining the long-term effectiveness of nutrition programs in supporting these disadvantaged communities, and also cuts a crucial food safety net programs. So not just within SNAP, but also within TFAP, which is an emergency food assistance programs that provide supplies food to food banks. So on one hand, we have SNAP, and then on the other hand, we have TFAP, which provides that food. And as I said earlier, 49 million people dependent on food programs when we saw the supply chains being disrupted during the pandemic and people losing their jobs. So when we're talking about SNAP and we're talking about TFAP, we have to really be thinking about how do we create a stronger, more sustainable food system, right? Because if we don't, and to Macy's point and Jeff's point, we're going to see these disruptions again when we face another pandemic, which is coming if we continue the factory farming that we're doing. And so it's really an important part of that emergency food assistance program. In another way in which is impacting SNAP within the Farm Bill is that people need access to fruits and vegetables. I'll tell you a story at Chili's on Wheels that is the most requested thing. Salads are actually really, really popular. We're always so surprised and so shocked by this, but that is one of the things that people request the most. And under this Farm Bill, it failed to adequately strengthen the GusNet program, which helps SNAP shoppers afford fresh fruits and vegetables, as I said, which are the most requested for people who are experiencing food insecurity. So as it has been mentioned before, the House Farm Bill already passed, and in some of the ways that SNAP was impacted, while there was an expansion for people with felony drug convictions and the elderly, country. It also cuts SNAP funding by $27 billion. It also allows states to outsource SNAP process for determining eligibility to private corporations, which we do not want. We do not want our food systems more in the hand of private corporations, and also prevents USDA from increasing or decreasing SNAP benefits by more than $250 billion. So massive cuts to SNAP benefits by eliminating required updates to the Thrifty Food Plan. So the Senate Farm Bill is in progress now. I think there's probably a less than 20% chance that this Farm Bill will go through. That's why we need all of you to really take action today. So again, we see an expansion of SNAP, not just for the formerly incarcerated, but also for Puerto Rican residents who are experiencing tremendous food insecurity right now and have been left out of SNAP historically, and for college students. One quick story, Chili's on Wheels, we have community fridges where people have access to healthy plant-based food throughout the day. And we get a lot of college students there. I met a college student that was only receiving $28 per month to survive in New York City and to buy food. Now, there are a lot of issues within SNAP, but cutting SNAP is not a solution. We need to be increasing access and increasing education to healthy eating and climate-friendly eating as well. So again, in the Senate Farm Bill, it would increase SNAP by an estimated $8 billion, in the GusNet program by $750 million over 10 years, and the TFAP program by $8 million annually. So a lot of pushback that SNAP gets is that it's too much money and that we shouldn't be investing so much money in this, that families should really be taking care of themselves and their children. But as you can see here, the spending on SNAP is really only about 1.5%. And I don't know about you, but I think it's highly important that people are well fed, that we have a population that has enough sustenance to pay attention in school, to succeed, so we can have a better future for everyone. So the idea that we shouldn't invest in our own people is a horrific idea, and we really need to be increasing that access instead of taking it away. And another thing that I would like to add to that, even when we're talking about education or decreasing poverty through increasing jobs access, those people cannot do that while they're hungry. And if their focus is only on where's my next meal going to come from. So while there's only a little bit of money spent on SNAP and food access and nutrition in this country, even though the Biden administration through the White House Conference on Hunger, Health, and Nutrition has made it a priority, we still have a lot to see that has not been done. So as Macy and some of the folks before have mentioned, there is no shortage of money when it comes to U.S. subsidies for factory farms and CAFOs. So the U.S. spends about $50 billion every year on animal ag, and the meat industry alone avoids over approximately $80 to $200 billion in environmental costs. So while we are talking about environmental justice, food justice, these corporations are really getting away with a lot, and as many of you know already, and there's never a shortage of money for the 1% that is monopolizing our food system. And one of the things that I would like to add is that these numbers are a little bit elusive, just because the USDA stopped publishing farm subsidy recipient names under the Trump administration, and there were billions unaccounted for. And here's another chart just detailing the different farm subsidies that go to corn and cattle. Corn, obviously, which most goes to feed, dairy, and different types of meat and dairy products. So some of the key takeaways from this is that SNAP is absolutely necessary unless we completely reform and change and transform our country, where everyone has access to education and all of these things, we're still going to see people who are experiencing poverty and multi-generational poverty. And when we talk about SNAP, we're talking about everyone, of every background, of every race, of every ability or disability. And we really need to be thinking about how we create a support system for those folks. And that SNAP provides children with access to nutritious food. And so how do we enhance their physical health and lower diet-related illnesses? Right now, we are seeing that diet-related illnesses and chronic diseases are showing up in children as young as 10 years old. So by the time that they're in high school or they're an adult, they're not just starting to eat healthy, they're trying to undo all of that damage that has been done by lack of access to food or lack of access to healthy food in schools. And again, SNAP is only 1.5% of the US federal budget. It is a small amount, and we should be pushing for a lot more, and we need a lot more to really address the food and nutrition insecurity in this country. And while the Farm Bill has expanded some eligibility, obviously for folks in Puerto Rico, as well as those who have been previously in prison, it is cutting funding, potentially really weakening nationwide nutrition support in this country. As I said earlier, folks that request fruits and vegetables the most, yet in this country, over 95% of people do not have enough access to healthy fruits and vegetables, leading to not having enough fiber intake, which then later on leads to more dietary related illnesses and diseases, leading to more costs in healthcare. And as I said, SNAP pales in comparison when it comes to funding other programs. So we really have to push our government to take action, to really focus on the people instead of these corporations, and to really understand that if people do not have food in their stomach, we're not going to have a population that is, one, well educated, because you cannot pay attention when you're hungry, and two, that is self-sustaining. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Jessica, back to you. I think we have a few minutes for Q&A.
Yes, here I am. Okay. This is a question for Eloisa, since we just heard from Eloisa. I know there are several programs for increasing plant-based foods in SNAP, like Double Up Food Bucks, Gus Nip, for example. How effective do you think these and other SNAP initiatives are in promoting healthy eating?
Well, it's definitely with the GusNet program going to be impacted. And so that's one of the things that I mentioned and that we are looking at. We are hoping to continue to increase the food as medicine programs. But yes, it will be impacted by the Farm Bill and will decrease access to fruits and vegetables, which is what we're trying to increase right now.
Okay, thank you. And then this is a question for any of the panelists, but maybe we'll start with Maisie, given her work with government affairs. What are the most effective strategies for engaging with legislators to ensure climate-friendly provisions in the farm bills and in other measures, especially in a politically divided environment?
Thanks, Jessica. This is a great question. And I think something that I always go back to is finding examples within your congressperson's district, which is obviously easier said than done, but just paying attention to local news stories, helping to uplift the work that folks are doing locally so that their stories are heard, one, and that so you can report them back to your representative or senator. I think it's so powerful, and you can't underestimate the value of that. And obviously different members are looking for different messaging. So if you're in a frontline district, I saw someone mention Sharice Davids, other members, they're going to be looking not for the partisan hyperbolic messaging. They're going to be looking for ways to back up their actions and decisions by showing that they are helping their constituents. Other members who are maybe more progressive are going to be looking for that more polarizing messaging. More moderate members are likely going to appeal more with economic impacts. I think it's really about kind of narrowing down, kind of like putting yourself in their position and then seeing the way that your message could be advantageous to them rather than just kind of why it's your priority. I don't know if Jeff or Eloisa have anything to add to that, but I don't want to take up too much time. So,
I think a great example is during the House Ag Committee's markup, Congresswoman Glusenkamp-Perez of Washington State, brought up a story, just highlighting a local farmer that was using organic practices, that was talking about the increased access to EQIP in the district. So I think really finding, those local constituencies. On pesticides, it's highlighting what laws, what local ordinances could be impacted by federal overreach, or looking at which elementary schools, right, are in the boss's district, or making that, I think, personal connection, to be honest, so that when they're in this markup, when staff is talking with the boss, or staff is talking with other staff, that they have somebody in mind, and that person is you, that they think about when they're talking about these issues.
Yeah, and I'll add really quickly, I think the focus on supporting local economies and lower costs of healthcare costs is important when highlighting SNAP. Folks tend to look at people who are experiencing food insecurity in a very negative manner, and really blame them for not having enough to eat. And so I think that when we speak to legislators, those are important things to highlight as well. The impact of SNAP on local economies and lower healthcare costs.
Okay, we only have a couple more minutes, and so there's so many great questions in the chat, but in the interest of finishing on time, I'm going to ask one question for all of the panelists, because I think it's just a really nice way to close. And then maybe if people want to stay after, I don't know if panelists can stay, but let's do this as our official closing question. Question for all the panelists: what gives you hope for a more resilient and just food system? And Maisie, you want to start?
Sure. I think I have to kind of, instead of zooming out, which is what, thinking about policy, you kind of have to do, I have to zoom in. And I really getting in touch with what's happening locally, as well as there was a great panel on the Hill. It was a public press conference a couple months ago put on by the Sustainable Energy and Environment Coalition, having to do with Farm Bill, that highlighted a bunch of small farmers across the country, everywhere from Arizona to Michigan, New York, Kansas. And these people are implementing climate smart practices every day. They are dedicated to caring for their land and providing healthier food for their local communities. And I think just seeing the people who are doing this voluntarily every day, it's really inspiring. And I try to expose myself to that type of work, because it just shows you that this is what's happening around us all the time, despite all of the kind of more depressing information in the news cycle. I'll kick it over to Jeff.
And I think the fact that, we're about to hit 2,000 actions tonight, I think really speaks to it. I worked on the 2018 Farm Bill, and I remember doing an in-person action party, similar type of event, and we had 15 people show up, 3 of whom were farmers that thought that we were going to try to take away their money, when that wasn't what we were doing, who by the end, were on our side. But to now we have over 2,000 and a few dozen people just on this call alone. So I think that really gives me hope that more folks are really paying attention, I think, and holding their elected officials accountable.
All right, I guess it's my turn. What gives me hope? First of all of you here, to Jeff's point, we have to really keep hope alive and keep fighting. But as an Afro-Indigenous person, our, Black and Indigenous folks, I just came back from my convening. I just landed a few hours ago. And we know what the way forward is. Indigenous folks have been protecting food systems and biodiversity for very long. And I think somebody mentioned the Native Farm Bill in the chat, so thank you for doing that. But I think that that's what really gives me hope. And I just had a conversation with my friend who's protecting the Missouri River and all the work that he is doing there. And so we have the knowledge of traditional and indigenous agroecological practices. I think that is going to be the way forward, coupled with a plant-forward and plant-based food system. And so I think unifying that traditional knowledge with ways that we can, perhaps replace what we're doing now, which is very horrific to animals, people, and planet, and coming together and healing this colonial system, I think is what gives me hope.
That was so beautiful, you guys. I'm going to pass it back over to Brett. We made our goal.
We made our
2034.
goal. Boy, you guys really, really, really rocked. Thank you so much for showing up tonight and taking all this action.